Okay, this is our introductory shiur to the sugya of machna shem לחבירו והקורא לחבירו בכינויו. So this is somebody who gives a nickname to somebody, and somebody who calls his friend a nickname. So this, I thought this was a relatively easy sugya. It turns out that it's pretty fascinating in terms of how in depth it goes and how much lumdus there is here. So let's look at the first makor here. Okay, so the Rambam says as follows: Kol echad ve'echad me'esrim va'arba anashim elu sheminyano af al pi shehem Yisrael ein lehem chelek olam haba. So all of these next 24 people that he's going to list, so even though they're Jews, they have no portion in the world to come. So what that means is a lot of times we think no portion in the world to come. That has a lot of connotations to it. What it means is that the act is very severe. Let's put it that way. It's very severe. And there are things that are less severe, sins that are less severe than them. And even though the Chachamim say that somebody, and even so, right? So the Chachamim say that anybody that habitually violates these lesser sins, they also have no portion in the world to come. And a person should be very careful about them. They should distance themselves from somebody that performs this sin, and they should be very careful about the sin. They should distance themselves not from the people, but from the sin itself, and they should be wary and be careful of violating the sin. Ve'en, what are these things that are less than the 24 that the Rambam had listed before? These are the sins that are lighter, they're less severe. But if you do them habitually, so then you lose your chelek olam haba. So he says, hamachna shem l'achaviro va'akor l'achaviro b'kinyoyo. So somebody who gives somebody a nickname, and somebody who regularly refers to somebody with a nickname. So that's not as severe as the 24 things he had listed before. But if you habitually do these things, so then you lose your portion in the world to come. But medvar umurim, right? So when so when is it that a person that habitually does these has no portion in the world to come? Kishemetz below teshuva. That's when somebody dies without doing teshuva. So as you did this, you regularly call people by their nicknames, and then you went ahead and didn't do teshuva. So then when you die, you have no portion in the world to come. But if he dies, if he repented and then he died and he was a Baal Tshuva, he was a repentant from his sin, he did everything properly. So then he is a person of Olam Haba, because nothing stands in front of Tshuva. Okay, so let's look at the just a couple questions to start us off here. So one, what's the issue here? What's the exact imperfection of giving somebody a nickname and regularly calling somebody a nickname? What about these actions qualify them to be called a lesser sin? That they're a lesser sin. What's the issue there? What is it? What makes them a lesser sin and not a harsher sin? Right. So, okay. What about these actions are only problematic if you do them regularly? Or at least problematic to the extent that you lose your chelek olam haba if you do them regularly, but the occasional violation, not as big of a deal to use your chelek olam haba. Those are the first 24 sins that the Rambam had listed. So those are serious sins that even one time that's bad. These are only bad if you do them regularly. So what's the difference there? The Rambam had said, if you remember, let's see if I could do this perfect, almost. He said, lazahar b'hen. Oh, look at that, lazahar b'hen. Right, and then earlier he had said, watch, okay, let's see, I can do this, almost do this. Okay, so he says, להתרחק מהם, and then over here he says, ולהזהר בהם. So what he says that you should distance yourself from the sin, and you should be careful about the sin. So what's the difference between being להתרחק, to distance yourself, and להתזהר בהם, and to be careful about doing it? Why the double language there? Okay, and then there is a general principle that if somebody does teshuva, you earn a place in the world to come. right? Irrespective of the sin, right? That's just a principle that we have. Teshuva erases the whatever ill effects on your soul of the sin, and you are ben olam haba. So what's the novelty here that the Rambam says that if you do teshuva, you have a chelek olam haba? That's obvious that we learned that already earlier in Hilchos Teshuva. So why does the Rambam say that here? And so is there a havamina, like could we think that even if you have done teshuva, so then you would, for calling somebody a nickname, then you would lose your chelek olam haba anyway? That seems to be why the Rambam has to list this, right? You don't list something unless you would think the opposite. So if the Rambam had already listed the principle of any sin that you do teshuva on, you have a chelek olam haba. So the only reason why the Rambam would have to repeat it here is because you might have thought otherwise. So why would you have thought that? Okay, so those are our first opening 5 questions. Okay, then if you look, this is the medrash here says as follows: Gimel dvarim afilu b'tshuva lo yaleh lo refuah. This is there's 3 things that even if you do tshuva, so there's no recovery from that. There's no recuperation from these sins. Okay, so right, so what are they? Habal eishes ish, somebody that has an affair with somebody else's wife. Somebody that is honored as they raise their own reputation with others at the expense of somebody else, right? So everybody's sitting around having a good time, and you make fun of your friend, and everybody pats you on the, smacks you on the back and says, "Oh, that was a great line." So you've raised yourself at somebody else's expense. And hamachna shem l'chavero, somebody that gives a nickname to his friend, right? So he says, "Yeshomrim," and there are those that add a fourth. That somebody that embarrasses his friend in public, even if it's within Divrei Torah, that's still a problem. So here you have an idea that even if you did teshuva, the medrash says, calling your friend by his nickname doesn't allow you to get a chelek in olam haba. And this is the Kolbo says like this. He says, Shlosha filosim teshuva. The Kolbo, who's a Rishon, brings this medrash down. L'halacha, he quotes it. Shlosha filosim teshuva ein lehem mechila. Right? They have no forgiveness even if they do teshuva, and one of them is hamachna shem l'chavero. Here you see is somebody that gives a nickname to how's friend. So how's that possible? How did teshuva not heal with this sin? Okay. Okay, the Gemara here in Bava Metzia says as follows: Yordin Legehenim Olim. Anybody that goes down right after you die. So if you sin, so then you go to Gehenim, you go to hell, right? So anybody that goes to hell, the Gemara says they go up. Okay, at some point you get taken out of Gehenim. Chutz mishlosha, except for 3. Yordin ve'en olim. They go down to Gehenim and they don't get back up. Elohein habal eishazish. These are 3 sins. Somebody that has an affair with somebody else's wife. Hamal bin Pnei Chavero Barabim, and now the Gemara includes if you embarrass your friend in public. V'amachna Shem Ra Chavero, and if you give your friend a bad nickname, right, a derogatory nickname. So the Gemara asks, Machna Hayim Malbim. So I understand giving somebody a bad nickname, that's embarrassing them in public. So that's the same exact thing. So Afagav to Dash Beishmei. So the Gemara says that it's that even if he's like used to hearing it, it's still a problem. Okay, so Rashi explains the dashbei kvar hurgo b'kach shemachlim. So even if he's used to it, he's had the nickname since he's in 3rd grade. It doesn't make a difference. Even if he's not embarrassed, it's still a problem. He's still going on to Gehenna when you're not brought up. Why? Because the person, when he calls him the nickname, why is he doing it? He's intending to hurt the guy's feelings. So that's the problem. So our first question I have on this Gemara is here when it says call Yordin legehenim olim. Anyone that goes up to Gehenim, it goes down to Gehenim is brought up. So what is that? Is that the same thing when the Rambam said that they don't have a portion in the world to come? Is that the same thing as ein lehem chelek olam haba? What's this idea of Yordin? Okay, Yordin legehenim ve'ein olim. What's that? What's the issue here? Okay, what does that mean? Okay, so that's our question. If there's an issue of calling somebody by a nickname, what difference does it make if he's used to hearing it, right? In other words, the Gemara had said, what's the difference between calling somebody a nickname and embarrassing them in public? The Gemara had said those 2 things are different. So if those two things are different, right, then the Gemara says, no, they are different. How are they different? Because we're talking about somebody who has a nickname that he's used to. That's still problematic. It's still a problem to call somebody a nickname that he's used to. That's different than somebody who's embarrassed in public. Because if he's embarrassed in public, so that's one category. Here we're talking about somebody who's not embarrassed, right? It says, the Rashi says, Ein panim mislavanos. His face doesn't turn white. He's not embarrassed by the nickname. He's always had it, and it's still a problem, right? So what's the difference now if he's used to hearing it or not? If the nickname is an issue, if calling somebody by nickname, so why are we saying that there's a difference if he's used to hearing it? Why is that different, right? So again, we're going to go with this idea of there must be a havami, there must be a thought that if the person was used to hearing his nickname, it would be okay to call him by the nickname. Right, that's what you might think. So why is it that you might think that would be okay if he's used to hearing it? Okay, let's go on. So we have another Gemara here. The Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, okay, Shelu Talmidov as Rabbi Zakkai. So the students asked, this is source number 6 here. The students asked the Rabbi Zakkai there, Rabbi. What extended your life? Like, how did you have such a long life? So he says, so I never, one of the things he says is, I never called my friend by a nickname. Okay, so right, so Tosfos says, right, so the authors of Tosfos, what do they say here? Afilu kinoi, right? So Tosfos here says even a nickname lo have gnai, that's not even derogatory, right? You call somebody good looking, right? That's what you call him. Say, hey, good looking, right? So that's not derogatory. The guy's good looking. You call him good looking. But he says, right? What's the idea here? So it's not derogatory, but either way, it doesn't make a difference because even a non-derogatory nickname brings shame to the name of the family, right? That's the idea. You should be calling them by the name of their family, and here you're not. Okay, so Rashi had said, if you remember, Rashi had said that the issue with a nickname was that its intention is to defame, right? Remember, Rashi said that even if the guy's used to hearing it, he doesn't even care. He's not embarrassed by it. It's still a problem because your intention by calling him is to defame him. Just because he doesn't get the fame doesn't mean it's not an issue. Okay. And Tosfos here says that the issue is the shame to the family name. So right. So how can we explain the debate between Rashi and Tosfos? Right. That's going to be our next question. Okay. Okay. If we go on here. Okay, so I skipped no, here we go. Okay, so another Gemara, same thing. He says, how did you, they asked Rav Ada bar Abba, how did you have such a long life? And he says, in my whole life, I never called a friend by his nickname. Okay, so Rashi says here in source number 9, says, so Rashi says that it is an issue of calling him something derogatory, right? It's not like what Tosfos had said before. So that is the issue, okay? And Tosfos says here, perish b'kinoi. What does he say? He says shemachin also b'nei adam l'gnai. He says the same thing. He says you're calling him something derogatory. Perish kinoi shem mishpachto shem avoy kamo shem chanichat avot begitin adasar daros. Right. So you call somebody a name that embarrasses their family. Right. Tosfos is consistent that he says this is about the family. So you call somebody a name about the family can go up. Right. So he says, and this is interesting, just a fascinating thing. He says that this was the beginning of the phenomena of last names. People then didn't really have last names. He says there are people. He says Kigon Rabbi Avram ibn Ezra. Right, he says what's the issue? You're going to call somebody a nickname. I guess he felt it was based on the nickname was going to then carry on to generations. So you're going to be shaming the family. So you call somebody, let's say, ugly. So then they're going to call everybody. The whole family is going to be known as ugly for the next 10 generations. So he says that's going to take the place of a last name. So he says Kagon Rabbi Avram ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra was Ibn Ezra, right? So he's one of the Rishonim, famous for his explanations on Chumash and his work on astrology. They still study his works on astrology. So he says, right? So he says it's an interesting thing. All of the Ibn Ezra's family is called Ibn Ezra. He wasn't the son of Ezra. That was what the family's last name was. But if you're going to give a nickname that's complementary, right, to the family, then Tosfos holds that that's okay. Okay, so that's what. So that's a difference. Okay. Going on, the Meiri says, okay, so a person should always be careful not to embarrass somebody in public. And a person should never mention his friend by a nickname. Even if the person doesn't mind the nickname. Okay, so it says, and he combines the two. The Gemara's phrase and the Rambam's phrase, this person goes down to Gehenim and they don't have a Chelek Yom Haba. But everything else, right, is teshuva works. Okay, so it's odd, right, that it's forbidden to do something to someone when the person doesn't care. In other words, I understand I can't smack somebody, I can't insult somebody, I can't I don't know. There's a million things that we could talk about between people that we're not supposed to do. I get that. Okay, but here what he's saying is that you can't do this, but even if the person doesn't care, right? So, right, it's like it's seemingly, according to the Meiri, there's something objectively wrong with calling somebody by a bad name, right? By a nickname, excuse me. Even if the person doesn't care, there's something objectively wrong with nicknames. That's fascinating. Well, what's wrong if the person doesn't care? Okay. Now look at this. This goes even further. This is the Baal Sros. This is source number 2. It says B'hachani. So lo hayikare af b'shem shemachim asom mishum ahava imeno shmo kagolim shem Ruben b'karan lo chayim. It says even if you're doing it out of love, Remember we had a debate between Rashi and Tosfos whether it was a name that was derogatory. And even if it wasn't derogatory, Rashi said it's, or if the person didn't care, Rashi said it's not a problem because it's still a problem because you're trying to hurt the person, you're trying to defame him. Here, right, the Baal Sros goes so far as to say that even if you're doing it out of love and the person's doesn't have a problem, right? It doesn't make a difference. Even then, even if your intention is okay, and even if the effect is okay, it still doesn't act still usher, which is a fascinating shita, which we obviously have to explain. What's the issue then? Okay, so then you have the Milunil, who's a later Rishon. He says Afagav Shlo Tachin Shlo Yisbayish Mekach Shemachnos B'Shem Ra. So the Riminil says, right, that no matter what the intention, no matter what the name, it's going to objectively embarrass the person. So it doesn't make a difference. Don't tell me that the guy doesn't care. He does care. That's the Riminil, right? And so his thing is counterintuitive, in my mind at least, the Riminil, okay? Because how could you have a position that even a name given in love is going to be embarrassing? I understand. I call somebody a nickname out of love. That's not. So you say no matter what, it's going to be embarrassing. And I call somebody a scholar. Or you're a Talmid Chacham, and I'm doing it out of love. I'm not like being facetious or sarcastic or in any way like passive aggressive. I really mean. I mean you're a scholar. So I start calling you scholar. And so the Riminil says no. You don't think that he's not going to be embarrassed by that. Any nickname objectively embarrasses somebody. Okay, let's look at the Kesef Mishnah here. So the Kesef Mishnah says Machna Shem Chavero Tanya Perak Azav Dein Lochel Gom Haba. So the Kesef Mishnah says that a person that calls a nickname has no portion of the world to come. But Amru Sham Dafilu Dash Be Bishmei, even if the guy is used to it, right? He's used to this. So says a Perish Rashi. Rashi says Kvar Hugo Bakach Shemachna Maso Bakach. So he says the guy's already used to it. Ve'en part of mismabos, and he does not get embarrassed. And we call him zelach limo mischavin. So he quotes Rashi, says the problem is that this guy is intending to hurt him. Nira midvarav, so it seems from Rashi, Di dash b'shmei, v'ze'enu meschavi lachlimo deshari. So he says it would seem to be that if the person's used to it, right, and he's not embarrassed by it, so then it should be permissible to call somebody by a nickname according to Rashi. So how are you going to know what the person is, what the person intended? So that's a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Kadosh Baruch Hu knows. So Kadosh Baruch Hu will judge you. But there seems to be no isser. If I'm asking, I say I know myself. I know I'm not trying to embarrass the guy, and I know that the guy isn't embarrassed. He's used to it, so there's no problem, right? What's the issue? Rabbeinu, meaning the Rambam Kasav, the Machna Shem, the Lo Chasa Shem Ra. But when the Rambam wrote his halacha, let's go back and look at the Rambam's language here, right? This was back in source number 1. When the Rambam wrote, look what the Rambam writes here. He says, right, Machna Shem, let me see if I can get it here. Machna Shem Lechavero, Va'aKorא Lechavero B'Kinyono, right? So the Rambam doesn't say a bad name. He just says a nickname, right? So the Kesef Mishnah commenting on the Rambam says he obviously disagrees with Rashi. He says that a nickname is a nickname. It doesn't make a difference if it's a bad nickname or a good nickname. And Nir Ali says the Kesef Mishnah, I think, Shechasav Chein the Rabbos ha the Dash Be B'Shmei Shekfar Ein Nir Abeinav Shem Rav Afilach Yaser. Says the Kesef Mishnah says he agrees with the Rambam. He says the fact that it doesn't say Aser, it just says that he's used to it, and that's still prohibited. So then that's the idea. The idea is that it's not necessarily a derogatory nickname, but it's still Aser. Okay, so that's the Kesef Mishnah's explanation. The Aruch here in source number 15 says, so if you shekino lo acherim lo karasiv. So the Aruch writes that even calling someone by a nickname that others coined is problematic, right? So he says, in other words, I'm sitting here and I'm saying tonight, I hear somebody else call the guy ugly. So I didn't come up with the nickname, right? Somebody else did. Right? It says what are the two things? Look at the title of the shiur. Hamachna Shem Chavero, Vakor Chavero Bekiniano. Somebody that comes up with a nickname for somebody. So if I don't come up with the nickname, so is that really still usher? So he says, it says the Aruch, even if you didn't come up with it, afilu Shem Shekiniano lo acherim lo karasiv. You're still not allowed to call him. That's the second part of the shiur, right? You're still not allowed to call him. But the Aruch has a fascinating havamina. It seems according to the Aruch, you might have legitimately thought that if I didn't come up with the nickname, it's okay. How's that possible? What's the difference if I came up with it or if I didn't come up with it? That's okay for me to call him by a nickname that he doesn't like. That's usher for me to call him if just because I didn't come up with the nickname. Okay, look at the Shulchan Aruch here. It says Yizar shel hachno shem ra lechavero afa pishu ragil boso kinoi. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins, you should be careful not to call somebody by a shem ra, right? By a bad name. Afa pishu ragil boso kinoi. Even though he's used to it. Im kavanasa levaisho aser. If his intention is to embarrass him, then that's aser. So according to the Mechaber, right, he's sort of combines all different shitos. He says you have to be careful not to call a bad nickname. So that's not like what we have. He understood the Rambam, right? The Shulchan Aruch is the same author as the Kesef Mishnah. So in the Kesef Mishnah, he said that it was any bad nickname. So here he says it has to be a bad nickname. Number one, says even if he's used to it, right? So it doesn't make a difference if he's used to it. And he says if his intention is to embarrass him, then it's usher. Okay, so so according to the Mechaber in the Shulchan Aruch in source number 16, our question is, what's the prohibition of calling a nickname if we don't care if the person's feelings are hurt, but only prohibited if you intended to hurt the person? Okay, so even if he's used to it, it's okay. But if your intention is to hurt him, then it's usher. So if we don't care about the person's feelings, so why are we caring about my intentions? That's strange. Okay, this next Rambam here we're going to use for our answer. Okay, so the Rambam says as follows. Says Kfar Hiskiru Dvarim Zuas Elu She'osa Osam Elo Chelagom Haba. Right, and so we already listed. This is the Rambam in Parak Chelik in Sanhedrin. So the Rambam in his explanation of the Mishnah, so he says as follows. He says we already listed many people that don't have a portion of the world to come. Somebody embarrasses his friend in public, he doesn't have a chel kol haba. Right, and somebody that calls his friend a nickname, and somebody who honors himself, he raises himself in front of his friends, his stature in front of his friends at the expense of somebody else. Because you don't want any of these things to happen. We don't. The rabbis wrote this because they have no chelek olam haba, because they don't want any of this stuff to take place. Even though they're easy, like quote unquote easy sins, according to the thought of the person, because the Rambam maintained that only like a person with serious imperfections, only a really bad person would do this, right? And this is never, right? You're going to be the most imperfect of people if you go ahead and do this. So any of these three sins. So the rabbis didn't want you to do them. So they said you have no chelek olam haba. That's the idea. Okay. So that's the shiur. That's the introductory shiur. B'li neder, and with God's help, we'll have shiur on Sunday. And I hope to see you there. Okay, it's going to be a fascinating start on sugya.